What if I told you an outnumbered Vietnamese Army 5 to 1 destroyed one of the largest Chinese invasion forces in history without even fighting them head-on? No walls, no superior weapons, no desperate last stand, just silence. Empty villages, abandoned roads where even the dogs had vanished. The year was 1427, and for more than a decade, Vietnam had fought tooth and nail to break free from the Ming dynasty's rule. But when 2 colossal Ming armies, over 200,000 strong, marched south, it looked like the end. And yet, the end never came, because the Vietnamese didn't resist the invasion. They invited it. They opened the doors, cleared the roads, and let the enemy walk straight into a shadow they would never leave. This is the story of how ghosts defeated an empire. In the autumn of 1427, 2 mighty Ming armies descended toward Viet. From the east came General Liu Thang, a veteran commander, leading more than 100,000 soldiers across the rugged passes of Guangxi. From the west, General Misi Than advanced with another massive force from Yu. Their mission was simple: break the Vietnamese resistance, relieve the besieged Ming stronghold at Exangjiang, and drag Vietnam back under imperial rule. On paper, victory was guaranteed. The Ming had numbers, experience, and a long history of conquest. To the outside world, it looked hopeless for the rebels. But then something strange happened. As Liu Thang's troops crossed into Vietnam, there was nothing. No resistance, no scouts, no traps. Villages were empty, fields abandoned, bridges left untouched. The road ahead was wide open. It felt too easy. And that was exactly the point. The silence wasn't weakness, it was design. Behind it all stood Lê Lợi, the rebel leader who had spent a decade fighting the Ming with nothing but determination and cunning. To his enemies, he was a bandit. To his people, he was hope. He had no empire behind him, no great arsenal, only farmers, blacksmiths, monks, and outlaws, an army born from the land itself. But Lê Lợi had something the Ming never understood: minds sharper than any sword. At his side was Nugent Tri, a scholar whose words cut deeper than steel. He could write letters that made enemy generals hesitate, spread rumors that turned soldiers against their own commanders, and craft illusions so convincing they trapped armies before a single arrow was loosed. Together with hardened warriors and masters of ambush, they forged an invisible army. They studied the arrogance of the Ming, who believed the Vietnamese would panic and scatter, and so they gave the enemy exactly what they expected: emptiness, villages abandoned, roads clear, fields left untouched. It wasn't retreat, it was bait. The Ming had no idea they were walking straight into a theater of death. Liu Thang's army pushed deeper into Vietnam, still finding nothing but silence. But the further they marched, the stranger things became. Scouts began to vanish. Supply wagons failed to return. Crops that should have fed the soldiers were suddenly gone, burned or hidden away. The roads narrowed into twisting paths. The valleys grew steeper. The jungle pressed in on every side. At first, the Ming soldiers mocked the Vietnamese, laughing at their cowardice. But then unease began to creep in. How could an entire nation vanish into thin air? The truth was brutal. The Vietnamese hadn't vanished, they were everywhere, hidden in forests, watching from ridges, moving silently by night. Every step forward stretched Ming supply lines thinner, cut communications shorter, and lured them deeper into a land that was no longer theirs. The arrogance that had carried the Ming this far was turning against them, and waiting ahead was the place where the illusion would shatter. Chi Lăng Valley. On October 10, 1427, Liu Thang led over 30,000 men into Chi Lăng Valley. At first glance it seemed peaceful. Bamboo forests swaying in the wind, a shallow stream glistening under grey skies, mountains rising like silent walls. But to the Vietnamese, this valley was a blade, sharpened by nature itself, waiting to cut. The Ming column stretched thin along the narrow road. Heavy cavalry struggled to move. Wagons creaked and stumbled in the mud. Then silence broke. A single arrow hissed out of the trees, then a dozen, then hundreds. From the ridges, from the forests, from the mist itself, the Vietnamese struck. Arrows rained down. Spears and pikes drove into the column. Hidden bamboo spikes skewered horses. Fires erupted where wagons stood trapped. Panic spread like wildfire. Soldiers slipped into the stream, dragged under as the water turned red. Liu Thang fought to rally his men, ordering his guards to break through. The Vietnamese seemed to give way, leaving a gap just wide enough to tempt him. He charged, but it was no escape. It was the final snare. From the ridge above, waiting in silence, the order was given. The trap snapped shut. In the chaos, Liu Thang's horse went down. He tried to rise, but too late. One swift strike ended the general's life. His head rolled in the mud of Chi Lăng. Silence followed, and then panic. Leaderless, the Ming army shattered. Thousands fled. Many never made it out. Others dropped their weapons and begged for mercy. The ghost army had struck and won, but the war wasn't finished, because far to the west, another massive Ming army was still marching straight into Vietnam. While the dust settled at Chi Lăng, the second Ming army under General Mi Than was already advancing from Yunnan. Tens of thousands of fresh troops, unaware that Liu Thang lay dead in the mud, believed they were marching to join forces and crush the Vietnamese once and for all. But instead of allies, they found shadows. Supply lines thinned. Maps became useless in the maze of rivers and forests. Villagers disappeared before they arrived, leaving behind nothing but cold ashes and empty fields. Every step forward was slower, heavier, hungrier. Then came the whispers. Nugent Troy's words slipped into Ming camps on scraps of parchment. Letters written like poetry, promising mercy, warning of disaster, whispering that their comrades were already gone. Some officers hesitated, some disobeyed orders, some deserted entirely. Meanwhile, the ambushes began. Not massive battles, just stabs in the dark, snipers in the trees, fires at night, false retreats that ended in sudden death. The Vietnamese didn't fight for ground, they fought for the enemy's mind. And piece by piece, the great Ming army unraveled. And by the time they reached Exong, the fortress they had hoped to relieve, they found not salvation, but flames. The stronghold had already fallen to a daring night assault. The last hope was gone. Now Mi Than had only two choices left: keep marching into ruin or surrender. The news of Liu Thang's death hit Mi Than like a thunderclap. His ally was gone, his supplies were vanishing, and the fortress he had hoped to save was already in Vietnamese hands. The land itself seemed to turn against him, closing in, rivers swelling, trails dissolving into mud. His army, once proud and unstoppable, was now starving, scattered, and afraid. Then came the message. One final offer from the Vietnamese: surrender or die here. Mi Than looked at the wreck of his forces. Tens of thousands of men, exhausted and broken, surrounded by a ghost army they could neither see nor defeat. There was no way forward, no way back, only silence pressing in from every side. And so, he chose. The Ming banners were lowered. Swords and spears were laid in piles. Tens of thousands of soldiers surrendered, not because they lacked courage, but because they had been out-fought, outmaneuvered, and undone by an enemy who refused to fight on their terms. For the first time in 2 decades of war, Vietnam stood free, but victory on the battlefield was only the beginning. What came next would echo for centuries. With the surrender of Mi Than's army, the Ming dynasty had no choice but to retreat. They called it a strategic withdrawal, but history remembers it as what it truly was: a crushing defeat. For Vietnam, it was the end of 20 years of occupation, tribute, and foreign banners on their soil. Viet was free. La Li, the rebel who rose from the mountains, was crowned emperor. But he never forgot the valleys that shielded him, or the villagers who sacrificed everything. And Nugent Tri, the strategist with a poet's hand, gave the victory its immortal voice. He penned the Great Proclamation upon the pacification of the Wu, a declaration of independence, centuries ahead of its time. A document that still echoes as one of Vietnam's proudest achievements. Across the land, stories of the victories, temple carvings, and stone tablets that honored not just generals, but the ordinary people. Farmers who burned their fields so the enemy couldn't use them. Mothers who carried messages under their clothes. Children who memorized mountain trails better than any map. They were the battlefield, as much as any soldier. Chi Lăng became more than a valley. It became a memory carved into the earth, a reminder that intelligence can overcome numbers, that patience can outlast pride, and that freedom is never given, it's taken. Centuries have passed since the jungles of Chi Lăng swallowed 2 mighty Ming armies. The roads are quiet now, the streams run clear, and rice fields bloom where blood once flowed. To a passerby, it's only silence, but beneath that silence, memory still breathes. This was never just a battle. It was proof that a small nation could outthink an empire, that courage could survive long after kingdoms fall, And it wasn't only about emperors or generals, it was about the villagers who vanished into the mist, the farmers who became fighters, the children who turned trails into maps of survival. Their names are mostly forgotten, but their choices shaped a nation. And what about us? We don't fight with swords or ambush armies in valleys, but every generation faces its own Chi Lăng test of patience, of conviction, of whether we stand or surrender. The lesson endures. Strength isn't always measured in numbers, but in memory, resilience, and the will to refuse defeat. So the next time silence surrounds you, remember Chi Lăng. Remember the ghosts who turned emptiness into a weapon. And ask yourself, when your Chi Lăng comes, will you be ready?